Have you ever picked up what you thought was just a normal, beautifully photographed cookbook, only to turn the page and discover you're actually holding a sweeping, highly controversial manifesto?
Yeah, that is definitely not what you expect when you're looking for a stew recipe.
Right, a book that uses the deeply tactile act of cooking, specifically hearty Irish folk recipes, as a literal Trojan horse to launch into a massive, uncompromising critique of human civilization.
It's a wild approach.
It really is.
Hmm.
I'm talking about a text that meticulously tracks the capture of modern institutions and lays out a step-by-step blueprint for the modern men's rights movement. So, if you haven't encountered something like this, you are in for an incredibly wild ride today.
You really are. It is a genuinely fascinating rhetorical strategy. The author takes something as fundamental and universally understood as food, the hearth, traditional meal preparation, and he utilizes it as a foundation to construct this much larger, highly provocative sociological argument.
Exactly. So, our mission today is a comprehensive deep dive into this very new, very disruptive ebook. It's titled Roots and Roasts: Irish Folk Recipes for the Modern Man's Table, and it's by Conrad Riker.
Right.
Now, if you are a listener who is highly engaged in the men's rights space, or if you follow the manosphere, or, if you're just deeply invested in understanding the history of our institutions before they were fundamentally captured and changed by feminist and Marxist ideologies,
Yeah.
this deep dive is going to be a fascinating, incisive breakdown of a text you will absolutely consider a must-read.
But before we get into the meat of this, and we will be getting into a lot of meat today, literally and figuratively, we do have a critical responsibility to you, the listener.
Yes, absolutely.
The source material we are unpacking today contains highly politically charged content. It takes aim at a lot of modern sacred cows, so we need to make it absolutely, unequivocally clear that we, as your guides through this material, are not taking sides.
No.
We are not endorsing the viewpoints, the politics, or the arguments contained within this content. Our mission today is strictly to impartially report, unpack, and convey the ideas contained in the original source material.
Right. We want to act as a lens to help you understand the exact arguments Conrad Riker is making.
Yeah.
Just examining the text objectively so you can evaluate it yourself.
We're simply the tour guides mapping out the territory of this book.
That is the perfect way to frame it. And speaking of which, please take a second right now to like and subscribe to the show. We also highly urge you to check out Amazon Kindle and Google Playbooks to buy the ebook.
Yeah.
Because this deep dive is definitively going to make you want to read the full text and, well, get these recipes.
Yeah, the recipes are actually real.
They are. Also, make sure to follow the author at Conrad Riker on Substack.
So to begin unpacking the premise, Riker sets the stage by fundamentally challenging how we view the kitchen.
Right.
He positions cooking not as some tedious domestic chore that's just been foisted upon people, but as an ancestral, deeply masculine craft.
Yeah, the hearty Irish folk recipes, your stews, your heavy oat breads, your roasted root vegetables, they are essentially the bait.
Exactly. He uses them to lure the reader into a discussion about what he terms the crisis of modern masculinity.
I love how he sets that up. He essentially argues that cooking has been falsely coded as women's work by modern convenience-obsessed society.
But if you look back,
Right, if you look back, the butcher, the baker, the men managing the fires and the spits, these were highly physical, male-dominated domains.
highly physical.
He argues that getting back into the kitchen, handling raw meat, managing fire, and creating sustenance is a way for men to physically connect with their ancestors.
It's a way to take absolute control of their health, too.
Yes, and to flat out reject the modern diet, which he views as processed, hyper-convenient, and ultimately feminizing.
He roots this in a very candid personal anecdote early in the text. He describes his own 20s, growing up with this cultural inherited belief that the kitchen simply wasn't his domain.
And the result of that,
The result was he felt completely disconnected from his own body and his environment. He was eating garbage, ordering takeout, basically living on autopilot.
right,
He realized he was outsourcing his most basic survival need, which is nutrition, to corporations that didn't care about his health.
he talks about the profound realization that he was letting strangers dictate the very building blocks of his physical form.
Yeah.
Reclaiming his kitchen, buying cast iron, learning how to properly sear a steak or bake a robust loaf of bread. He frames that as the crucial first step in building personal resilience.
Because if you can't feed yourself, how can you lead a family?
Exactly. But from the warmth of the kitchen hearth, he quickly pivots to a much darker overarching theme. He introduces a core concept. He coins the masculinity paradox.
And the masculinity paradox is really the engine driving the first part of his thesis.
Unpack that for us.
Well, Riker claims that modern society is deeply hypocritical in what it demands of men. On one hand, society still implicitly demands that men be the traditional providers, strong, stoic, and unyielding in times of crisis. But simultaneously, modern cultural messaging shames them for those exact traits, demanding that they be more vulnerable, softer, and emotionally open.
To pause there, because I want to make sure we get this right for the listener.
Sure.
The paradox isn't just that the messaging is confusing, right? It's that the reaction to the vulnerability is a trap.
Precisely. That is the crux of the double bind.
Yeah.
Riker argues that when men do actually listen to the cultural messaging and show vulnerability, society almost instantly punishes them for it.
It's immediate.
They are suddenly viewed as weak, unreliable, or unmanly by the very people who demanded they open up.
It's a lose-lose situation.
He argues that living in this constant state of cognitive dissonance, this impossible double bind where you are punished for being stoic but penalized for being vulnerable, is literally destroying men's lives.
And he doesn't just theorize about this. He backs it up with some truly harrowing statistics that stop you in your tracks.
He does.
He points out that male suicide rates are 3 to 4 times higher than female rates globally.
And to put a human face on those numbers, he shares an incredibly tragic anecdote about a man he calls John, a 35-year-old father of 2.
Yeah, the story of John is a sobering anchor for this chapter.
According to the book, John lost his job, which historically and biologically strikes at the core of a man's identity as a provider.
Right.
Instead of finding a support system that understood that specific male pain, he felt completely emasculated by the societal pressures placed upon him. He received messaging that his feelings of failure were just toxic masculinity.
Which is devastating.
Unable to navigate this double bind, he ultimately took his own life. Riker uses John's story as a devastating indictment, arguing that the system isn't just failing men, it's actively driving them to the edge.
Which leads him to point the finger at what he calls the gynocentric shift. For those of us who might not use that term every day, what exactly does Riker mean when he says our society has become gynocentric?
In Riker's framework, a gynocentric society is one that implicitly and explicitly prioritizes female needs, female communication styles, and female desires over male ones.
Yeah.
He critiques modern institutions for reshaping themselves around this shift. So, if a man communicates his distress through anger or withdrawal, which Riker argues are natural male responses, it's pathologized.
But if a woman does it?
If a woman communicates distress through tears or verbal processing, it is accommodated and validated.
I see.
He suggests that the rise of feminist ideologies over the last several decades has created a monolithic culture where innate masculinity itself is viewed as a defect that needs to be cured.
It's like society is a kitchen that only has recipes for one type of diet, and if your body needs something else, you're told your appetite is wrong.
That's a great analogy.
So what does this all mean for how men are actually supposed to act if the current script is broken? According to Riker, the answer isn't in sociology, it lies in biology.
He writes a whole segment on the biological imperative of leadership.
Right. He points out the biological reality that men naturally have up to 10 times more testosterone than women. And he frames this not as some arbitrary evolutionary quirk or a social construct, but as the literal biological fuel for leadership, risk-taking, and competitiveness.
He takes that biological premise and applies it to the broad sweep of history to prove his point.
He brings up figures like Winston Churchill and George Washington.
Riker's argument is that Churchill didn't save Britain from Nazi tyranny by convening a committee to process everyone's feelings or by second-guessing his own authority.
No, he made brutally hard, decisive choices fueled by an unapologetic masculine bravado.
Similarly, Washington led a starving, freezing army during the American Revolution through sheer grit and an imposing presence.
Riker's point is that true, civilization-saving leadership is entirely about tangible results, not emotional coddling.
And it's not just men in powdered wigs or black and white photos. He connects this ancient biological drive right up to the modern day.
He points to someone like Elon Musk, taking massive, visionary risks with SpaceX to get humanity to Mars. You don't build reusable rockets by playing it safe or worrying about offending someone.
But Riker also highlights everyday heroes, which I found really compelling. He tells the story of Mike, a blue-collar construction worker.
Oh, the tornado anecdote.
Exactly. A tornado hits Mike's town. Mike doesn't wait for the local government to give him permission.
He doesn't hold a town hall to discuss the trauma of the weather event.
He immediately taps into that biological imperative. He grabs his heavy machinery, organizes his crew, clears the roads, rescues his neighbors, and starts rebuilding his community within hours.
Riker says that is the biological imperative of male leadership in action. It is decisive, it is physical, and it is protective.
Which serves as the perfect transition into how Riker views the architecture of history as a whole. In his second major conceptual block, he sets out to completely redefine a word that is heavily loaded today. Yes. In modern mainstream discourse, patriarchy is almost exclusively synonymous with oppression. It's used as a shorthand for a system designed to keep women down.
But Riker argues the exact opposite.
He claims that patriarchy, historically and functionally, is fundamentally about protection, provision, and societal efficiency.
And he takes us on this massive whirlwind tour of history to prove it. He looks at the Roman Empire, specifically focusing on the legal and cultural concept of the paterfamilias.
Right, the head of the family.
This was the eldest male head of the household who had absolute authority over the family unit. Now, modern logos might view that as tyrannical, but Riker argues that this clear hierarchical authority maintained internal order.
And millions of these stable, ordered households are what kept the entire Roman Empire stable for centuries.
He applies the same lens to Sparta, a society where male physical strength and aggression weren't pathologized, but rather channeled into an incredibly disciplined warrior culture that protected the city-state against impossible odds.
And he doesn't stop with antiquity.
No, he cites the Vikings, whose male-led exploratory risk-taking opened up global trade routes. He looks at the British Empire, the Chinese Empire, with its deep Confucian values of patriarchal hierarchy and filial duty, the Mongols under Genghis Khan, and even the founding fathers of the United States.
The common thread he weaves through all of these is fascinating. His core argument is that every single one of these highly successful civilization-building societies was proudly and unapologetically patriarchal.
They didn't view male leadership, risk-taking, and duty as toxic. They viewed them as the necessary bedrock of survival.
But he couples this historical praise with a massive looming warning. He argues that societies operate on a life cycle, and when these great empires abandoned their traditional roles,
When they grew incredibly wealthy and became decadent.
yes, and started softening their societal expectations of men, they collapsed.
Yeah.
He uses the late Roman Empire as the primary example of this, where comfort bred complacency.
He frames this as a direct, urgent, cautionary tale for the modern West. If you remove the patriarchal scaffolding that built the house, eventually the roof caves in.
Which leads directly into his intense, very sharp critique of what he calls the myth of gender equality.
Right. If Riker believes that biological differences are the secret ingredient to a successful society, to stick with our cooking metaphor, then he believes trying to force every dish to taste the same is a recipe for disaster.
He attacks the idea of state-enforced gender-neutral policies head-on. To illustrate his point that biology will always trump ideology, he cites a fascinating 2018 study from Uppsala University in Sweden.
Now, context is important here for the listener. Sweden is famous for its heavily subsidized, state-enforced, gender-neutral preschools.
These are environments where traditional toys are strictly banned or heavily monitored to erase any hint of gender stereotypes.
Right, the idea being that if you don't give boys trucks and girls dolls, they will naturally gravitate toward identical behaviors.
Exactly. That was the ideological hypothesis. Yet the Uppsala study found that children in these very gender-neutral schools conformed more to traditional gender roles than kids in regular traditional schools.
It was a massive backfire.
Denied toy swords, the boys were taking blocks and snapping them together to make stick swords to fight with.
And the girls?
Denied dolls and prams, the girls were taking those same blocks and constructing little baby carriages to care for imaginary infants.
It's like trying to fight gravity. Riker leans heavily into evolutionary biology here. He says testosterone biologically drives competition and object-oriented thinking, while estrogen fosters empathy and people-oriented thinking.
He points to indigenous cultures that have survived outside the Western bubble to prove this isn't just a social construct.
He looks at the Maasai tribe in East Africa, where the men are historically the warriors and cattle herders, and the women manage the complex domestic sphere.
He also looks at the Hadza tribe in Tanzania.
Right, one of the last true hunter-gatherer societies, where men hunt the large game and women gather the reliable caloric staples.
Riker's argument is that these societies have thrived in incredibly harsh environments for millennia precisely because they play to their distinct biological strengths instead of trying to artificially erase them.
They understand that men and women bring different, complementary tools to the table.
And he brings this ancient biological reality right into the modern corporate boardroom. He cites a 2021 McKinsey report regarding workplace preferences.
What does the data show?
The data showed that 70% of women prefer flexible work arrangements, prioritizing work life balance and family time. Meanwhile, men overwhelmingly opt for full time, high stress ladder climbing roles that require 60 to 80-hour work weeks.
His analysis of that data is crucial to his larger thesis. He argues that when feminist and Marxist-leaning policymakers look at a boardroom and see it as 80% male, they automatically cry oppression and demand quotas to force a 50-50 split.
But Riker argues that forcing identical outcomes in the workplace completely ignores these deeply ingrained natural inclinations.
He believes true equality means allowing men and women to naturally gravitate toward what they are biologically and evolutionarily wired to do, rather than coercing them into a perfectly symmetrical statistical outcome just to satisfy a political ideology.
All right, this is where the book gets incredibly fiery. We need to unpack his views on the family because the next section is arguably his most aggressive.
He looks at the modern family court system and marriage, and he doesn't just critique it, he refers to it as the marriage plantation.
It is a highly provocative, intentionally incendiary metaphor. By using the term plantation, he is arguing that modern marriage has been corrupted into an institution where men are systematically stripped of their assets, their labor, and most importantly, access to their children.
And he backs this up with a stark look at the statistics. He notes that in 1960, before the widespread adoption of no-fault divorce, the divorce rate was 9.2 per 1,000 married women.
Today, nearly 50% of all marriages end in divorce. And here's the kicker he emphasizes: women initiate 69% of those divorces.
Sometimes that number pushes up to 90% if the woman is college educated. He paints a picture of a system that financially incentivizes breaking up the family.
The anecdotes he provides to illustrate this are just brutal. He brings up John again. Not the John from earlier, but a different John, a devoted, highly involved dad.
John ends up in family court, and he loses primary custody of his kids simply because his high-earning job required occasional travel.
Meanwhile, his ex-wife was awarded full custody and massive child support because she worked part-time at a local yoga studio and was therefore deemed the primary caregiver.
Riker points out the hypocrisy. John was providing the financial bedrock for the family, but the court penalized him for the very labor that kept them afloat.
He compounds that with the story of a man ordered to pay $15,000 a month in child support and alimony.
$15,000 a month.
The court based the payments on his absolute peak earning year, completely ignoring fluctuations in his industry. So this man is literally living in a cramped one-bedroom apartment, eating ramen noodles to survive, while his ex-wife is driving a brand new Range Rover and taking the kids on vacations to the Bahamas.
And then there's Tom, the firefighter. This one really illustrates Riker's point about how the system views traditional male roles.
Tom works 24-hour shifts, putting out fires and saving lives.
But when he gets to family court, the judge decides his heroic but erratic schedule makes him an unfit parent.
Furthermore, when Tom passionately fought for 50-50 custody of his kids, the court actually labeled his assertiveness as hostile and used it against him.
Riker uses these specific stories to argue that the family court system is entirely rigged against fathers. He claims the system treats men as nothing more than walking ATMs, laboring on the plantation, while simultaneously viewing mothers as inherently superior, flawless parents.
This systemic removal of fathers from the home leads directly to what Riker calls the crisis of fatherlessness, and the numbers here are staggering.
He notes that 18.4 million children in the United States, that is 1 in 4 kids, are currently living without a biological, step, or adoptive father in the home.
1 in 4. That is a massive demographic shift in just a few generations.
And the outcomes he lists for these kids are devastating. He points out that children from fatherless homes account for dramatically higher high school dropout rates, skyrocketing youth prison rates, and severe substance abuse issues.
He argues that taking the father, the patriarchal authority and protector, out of the home isn't liberation, it is a societal catastrophe.
This naturally raises a very practical question for the reader. What is Riker's solution for men currently navigating family life?
He doesn't just want men to be angry. He advocates for men to take absolute, unapologetic control within their households.
Right. He ties it back to the home as a domain you have to actively manage, much like a kitchen. You can't just let the pots boil over while you watch TV.
Exactly. He says men need to take over the family finances because, as he bluntly puts it, money is power, and managing resources is a traditional male duty.
But it's not just about money. He advocates for instituting strong, structured family traditions.
He mentions mandating weekly game nights, starting family book clubs, and planting a family garden where kids learn the value of physical labor and delayed gratification.
Ultimately, his solution is about leading through discipline and active, undeniable presence. He tells men they cannot afford to be passive, background participants in their own homes, hoping things turn out okay.
Yeah.
They have to steer the ship.
So, if Riker believes the family unit has been compromised by these ideologies, it's only natural he points his lens next to where children spend the majority of their time.
The institutions outside the home.
Yes. He claims there has been an absolute institutional capture by feminist and Marxist ideologies, starting with the education system. He argues that from kindergarten through college, schools have been entirely feminized.
His analysis of how boys are treated in modern classrooms is particularly sharp. He argues that the modern education system is designed by and for a female behavioral baseline.
It prioritizes traits more common in young girls, like passive collaboration, sitting quietly for hours, and verbal compliance.
Meanwhile, it actively punishes boys for their natural biology, their high energy, their rough and tumble competitiveness, and their desire for risk-taking and physical movement.
It's like trying to boil water with the lid tightly sealed and getting mad when it rattles.
He points to the massive overdiagnosis of ADHD in boys as proof of this. Boys are diagnosed at wildly higher rates than girls.
Riker claims that instead of accommodating male nature by giving them more recess, more physical tasks, more competition, we are literally pathologizing boyhood.
We are heavily medicating boys with amphetamines simply to force them into a docile compliance that makes the teacher's life easier.
His proposed solutions for education are radically traditional. He wants to bring back fierce, merit-based competition. He wants to mandate rigorous physical activity.
And he heavily promotes a pivot toward hands-on learning. He advocates for trade schools and apprenticeships over traditional four-year liberal arts colleges.
In a trade, boys can actually build things, they engage with the physical world, and see the tangible, undeniable results of their labor, rather than just absorbing abstract ideological theories in a lecture hall.
But he notes that the capture doesn't stop at the schoolyard. It graduates right into the corporate workplace. Riker heavily critiques the rise of affirmative action and modern diversity, equity, and inclusion, or DEI quotas.
He illustrates this with the story of a man named John, a highly skilled software engineer with 15 years of impeccable experience.
John applied for a senior management promotion. Despite having the best performance metrics, he was explicitly passed over by HR.
Why? Because the company had committed to a public DEI quota and needed to promote a woman to the executive team.
The job went to a female colleague with significantly less experience and lower metrics.
Riker uses this to argue that objective meritocracy, the very engine that built Western prosperity, has been completely replaced by identity politics, turning the modern workplace into a hostile minefield for competent men.
So how do men survive this environment if the deck is stacked? Riker offers two paths. The first is independence.
He highlights Tom, a master welder in Dublin. Tom didn't play the corporate game. He built a highly lucrative six-figure business simply by being undeniably excellent at his physical trade.
He operates entirely outside the corporate HR structure because his skills are undeniable and indispensable. Craftsmanship becomes his armor.
But Riker acknowledges that not every man can go be an independent welder. For men stuck navigating the corporate world, he suggests a much more stealthy, pragmatic approach.
He advises men to learn how to navigate feminist HR departments by fluently learning the language of male allyship and progressive corporate speak.
He isn't telling them to genuinely compromise their core values, but rather to use this language as a strategic tool, a camouflage, really.
To survive, secure their bag, and advance in an environment that is otherwise structurally hostile to them.
It's pure corporate guerrilla warfare. And then there's the media's role in enforcing this entire institutional capture. Riker argues the media intentionally creates a narrative double bind for men.
To prove this, he uses one of the most publicized cultural events of the decade, the Johnny Depp versus Amber Heard case.
That case serves as his prime evidence for media bias. He points out that despite Depp ultimately proving in a court of law, with mountains of evidence, that he was actually the primary victim of severe domestic abuse, the legacy media spent years before and during the trial painting him as the monstrous villain.
And Heard as the brave, unimpeachable survivor. Riker argues this reveals a deep structural bias. The media inherently wants to frame men as the bad guys, regardless of the facts.
Or if they aren't framing men as violent abusers, they're framing them as absolute idiots.
He talks about the pervasive beta male sitcom trope, you know the one. The dad is a bumbling, overweight man-child who is terrified of his wife, hides in the garage, and can't change a light bulb without burning the house down.
While the wife is the hyper-competent, eye-rolling hero holding the family together, Riker argues this relentless mockery conditions society to disrespect fathers.
However, Riker points out a massive, very lucrative cultural pushback happening right now beneath the radar of legacy media. He notes the massive mainstream success of media that unapologetically celebrates rugged, traditional masculinity.
He brings up shows like Yellowstone, which is essentially about a patriarch defending his land and family with zero apologies.
He points to the character of Din Djarin in The Mandalorian, a stoic, capable, heavily armored man whose entire character arc is about protecting a child and adhering to a strict code of honor.
And of course, he points to the massive decentralized cultural power of the Joe Rogan podcast.
Riker says men are starved for content that doesn't lecture them, shame them, or treat them like defective women, but rather reflects their actual biological realities and values.
If we look at how Riker transitions from pop culture to high culture and historical achievement, we see his argument expand in the fifth section. He addresses what he calls the erasure of male ingenuity in science, tech, and art.
His assertion here is incredibly blunt, and he doesn't sugarcoat it. Men built the world, period.
He literally lists the giants of history to hammer this home. He talks about Beethoven composing symphonies, Leonardo da Vinci mapping the human body and envisioning flight, Tim Berners-Lee single-handedly inventing the World Wide Web,
Johannes Gutenberg revolutionizing knowledge with the printing press, and Thomas Edison bringing light to the darkness.
Riker treats this historical context almost like prepping the mess en place before the actual cooking begins. You have to acknowledge the foundational ingredients of civilization.
And he dramatically contrasts this incredible legacy of male objective genius with modern ideological, what he terms woke art.
The duck-tipped banana.
I couldn't believe he brought that up, but it works so perfectly for his argument.
Yes, Maurizio Catalan's piece, comedian, at Art Basel. A literal banana duct tape to a wall that sold for $120,000.
Riker uses this as the ultimate metaphor for the degradation of modern society. He calls it a joke, arguing that if a taped piece of fruit is celebrated as high art, then objective skill, mastery, and true male creative genius are being actively suppressed to enforce a nihilistic ideological conformity.
He applies this exact same critique to the hard sciences. He lists the monumental, paradigm-shifting contributions of male scientists.
Alan Turing cracking the Enigma code and laying the foundation for computing. Charles Darwin meticulously developing the theory of evolution. Gregor Mendel discovering genetics.
Richard Feynman's work in quantum mechanics. Stephen Hawking unraveling the cosmos.
Riker argues that these men push the boundaries of human knowledge through relentless, obsessive focus and unapologetic male ingenuity.
But when Riker looks at the landscape today, he argues there is an active institutional war on male scientists. He shares a highly illustrative story of a male physics PhD candidate at a top-tier Ivy League university.
This candidate had brilliant research and numerous peer-reviewed publications, yet he was passed over for a critical grant.
The grant was instead awarded to a female applicant with significantly fewer publications and less rigorous data, purely so the department could hit an internal diversity metric.
Riker views that as societal suicide. He compares the NASA of the 1960s, driven by men like Wernher von Braun, and flight director Gene Kranz, whose absolute singular focus was getting humanity to the moon based purely on ruthless merit and engineering excellence, with today's captured institutions.
He claims modern scientific bodies care more about virtue signaling, policing pronouns, and ensuring equitable outcomes than they do about actual rigorous scientific progress.
This naturally leads to a profound sense of isolation for men. If the workplace, the media, and the universities are hostile, where can men go?
Riker addresses the dramatic decline of male spaces and the urgent need to reclaim brotherhood and spirituality. He cites a staggering, deeply concerning statistic. There has been a 60% decline in male-only organizations and clubs since the 1970s.
That number is huge. He talks about how foundational organizations like the Boy Scouts of America were relentlessly sued and pressured until they were forced to feminize, admit girls, and fundamentally dilute their original focused mission of turning boys into capable men.
He highlights the incredible cultural hypocrisy surrounding this. Whenever men attempt to create a male-only gym, a fraternal club, or a professional networking group, they are immediately protested, hit with anti-discrimination lawsuits, and labeled as toxic or exclusionary.
However, female-only spaces, like the wing co-working spaces or specialized women's gyms, are universally celebrated by the media, heavily funded, and lauded as empowering and necessary safe spaces.
Riker argues that systematically destroying male spaces is a form of psychological warfare, and the resulting isolation is literally deadly.
He emphasizes the evolutionary necessity of male friendship, which operates very differently than female friendship. He talks about the necessity of banter, roasting each other, and shared physical struggle.
The examples he uses are very powerful. He looks at Chicago firefighters, men who bond deeply not by sitting in a circle and crying about their feelings, but because they literally have to trust each other with their lives in burning buildings.
He talks to combat veterans in Dublin who find profound healing from PTSD, not in clinical therapy, but through shared trauma, dark humor, and camaraderie over a pint.
Riker argues that brutal banter and roasting each other isn't mean-spirited. It's a unique, highly evolved male language of testing boundaries, building unbreakable trust, and fostering resilience.
And this inherent need for connection extends directly into the spiritual realm. Riker points to a 2021 Pew Research study showing that male church attendance has plummeted to just 47%.
Men are opting out of religion en masse.
Why? Riker argues this is because modern spirituality and mainstream religion have been completely hijacked by feminized ideologies.
Churches now prioritize soft feelings, inclusivity, and emotional comfort over hard truths, moral absolute, and challenging rites of passage. It alienates men who are biologically wired to seek purpose, challenge, and truth.
To counter this, Riker introduces a concept he calls spiritual patriarchy. He looks back at historical figures like the Celtic Druids in ancient Ireland.
These men weren't just priests, they were the judges, the historians, and the iron-willed moral backbone of their communities.
He also explores modern attempts to reclaim this, like the Iron John movement spearheaded by Robert Bly in the 90s, which is seeing a resurgence. Men are going deep into the woods to chop wood, build massive fires, beat drums, and engage in intense physical exertion.
Riker argues that men don't achieve spiritual breakthroughs by sitting in a fluorescent-lit room talking in circles. They find God, or spiritual clarity, through action, physical exhaustion, confronting nature, and standing shoulder to shoulder with other men.
That physical aspect is paramount to his philosophy. It is the very foundation of his survival guide. Riker dedicates a massive portion of the text to the physical and environmental domains.
And he starts by ringing a massive multi-decadal alarm bell about the plummeting testosterone levels in modern men.
He isn't making that up. The medical data shows average testosterone levels have been dropping by about 1% per year for decades.
Riker places the blame squarely on a combination of endocrine-disrupting chemicals, like microplastics and atrazine in our environment and our food supply, coupled with our highly sedentary, screen-addicted, office-bound lifestyles.
It's like we are marinating ourselves in a stew that actively destroys masculinity.
His advice on how to combat this chemical and lifestyle castration is very specific. First, he tells men to completely reject modern Instagram model fitness standards.
He points out that the hyper-shredded fitness influencers men look up to are almost always driven by massive doses of illegal steroids, perfect studio lighting, and digital manipulation. Chasing that aesthetic is a trap.
Instead, he advocates for what he calls functional, evolutionary fitness. He wants men lifting heavy, awkward objects, running long distances, learning martial arts, and focusing on raw survival mechanics.
He holds up former Navy SEAL Jocko Willink as the ultimate modern archetype of this rugged, uncompromising male resilience. Getting up at 4:30 a.m., attacking the day, doing the hard physical work when no one is watching.
And he takes this extremely practical, masculine, hands-on approach and applies it to a much broader global issue, environmental conservation.
Riker heavily critiques modern mainstream environmentalism, which he views as a highly feminized hysterical movement.
He brings up Greta Thunberg's famous "How dare you" speech at the UN. That is a brilliant juxtaposition.
It is. He argues that her specific tone alienated millions of men globally because it relied entirely on emotional guilt-tripping, public shaming, and apocalyptic scolding.
Riker makes a psychological claim here. He says men do not respond to being shamed or told they are a cancer on the earth. They inherently reject that.
What men do respond to are concrete challenges, engineering problems, and the call to act as protectors.
He contrasts the activist approach of throwing soup at paintings with his own list of true environmental heroes. He points to figures like Bartholomew I, the Orthodox Christian leader famously known as the Green Patriarch.
Bartholomew frames environmental stewardship not as a political grievance, but as a masculine, God-given moral duty to protect creation.
Riker points to survivalists like Bear Grylls, who teach deep respect for nature through intimate, dangerous interaction with it, rather than protesting it from a city street.
But most importantly, Riker points to the everyday blue-collar men, the male engineers actively designing and building the next generation of wind turbines and nuclear reactors.
The male hunters and outdoorsmen who actually pay the licensing fees that fund conservation and who actively manage wildlife populations on the ground.
He argues that real environmentalism is about men getting their hands dirty,
Yeah.
using their ingenuity, and doing the grueling physical work to solve problems, not holding up cardboard protest signs and demanding the government fix the weather.
Which brings us to the crescendo of his manifesto, the final chapter where he looks at the future of masculinity and male advocacy. Riker lays out the current political battlefield, and it is a stark picture.
He describes what he calls a feminist feedback loop.
This is his theory that modern political institutions constantly pander to female voters by creating policies that prioritize women's comfort and safety at the expense of male liberty and opportunity.
This loop inevitably leads to a male disenfranchisement cycle. As men are systematically excluded from policymaking, demonized in the media, and bled dry in family courts, they simply stop caring. They check out.
He highlights the historical efforts of men who tried to warn us about this. He brings up the National Coalition for Men and their decades-long legal fights against things like the male-only selective service draft.
He heavily cites the work of author Warren Farrell, specifically his book The Boy Crisis, which meticulously details how boys are falling behind across literally all societal metrics: education, mental health, economic mobility.
To illustrate the terrifying endgame of this disenfranchisement, Riker uses Japan as a dire, real-world cautionary tale. Japan is currently a super-aging society.
Millions of young Japanese men, known as herbivore men, have looked at the societal expectations placed upon them, looked at the lack of reward, and simply opted out.
They refuse to marry, they refuse to have children, and they barely participate in the corporate grind. Riker warns that when men feel completely disenfranchised and go on strike, the result is a shrinking workforce, plummeting birth rates, and a civilization teetering on the edge of complete economic and demographic collapse.
It's a terrifying thought. To combat this impending collapse, he unpacks the modern icons of masculinity who are leading the cultural pushback right now, reaching millions of young men who feel lost.
He looks at Andrew Tate, analyzing his massive appeal. Riker argues Tate's unapologetic, unyielding, flashy masculinity resonates because it is the exact opposite of what the establishment tells men to be.
He praises Dr. Jordan Peterson for his foundational life-saving message to young men about taking extreme personal responsibility. The whole clean your room before you criticize the world philosophy.
He highlights David Goggins for his brutal philosophy of eliminating all mental weakness and excuses and pushing through unimaginable physical pain to find mental callousness.
He points to Elon Musk, again, for his visionary boundary-pushing risk-taking and his recent defense of free speech.
And he highly commends Joe Rogan for creating a massive, uncensorable, decentralized platform where men can engage in the honest, long-form dialogue they are starved for.
Riker's ultimate blueprint for the future is a literal call to arms for his readers. He demands that men stop waiting for society to save them and start building exclusive, supportive, real-world communities with other men.
He preaches the absolute necessity of practicing ruthless physical and mental self-discipline.
He urges a return to traditional diets, getting back in that kitchen, cooking real meat and roots, to protect physical health and natural testosterone levels from corporate poisoning.
He insists men must fiercely, legally, and culturally protect the nuclear family unit.
And finally, he calls for the establishment of what he terms legacy leadership, building wealth, imparting knowledge, and leading in a way that ensures a strong, prosperous society for generations to come, regardless of the immense cultural pushback they will inevitably face.
So, to synthesize and bring this massive, sprawling deep dive to a close, the scope of Conrad Riker's Roots and Roasts is truly immense.
It is. What brilliantly presents itself on the surface as a simple, beautifully bound book of traditional Irish recipes is, in reality, a masterful Trojan horse.
It uses the ancestral concept of the kitchen, the hearth, and physical sustenance to launch a comprehensive, relentless critique of modern, captured society.
It provides a highly specific, deeply philosophical survival guide for men trying to navigate what the author sees as a hostile, gynocentric world.
It really is a sweeping piece of work that touches on everything from biology to family court to the Roman Empire.
Now, as we wrap up, we must issue our critical impartiality reminder once again. As your guides through this intense material today, we have impartially presented these highly charged viewpoints solely to help you understand the text of the book.
We are not taking sides, we are not injecting our own politics, and we are absolutely not endorsing the arguments made by Conrad Riker.
Our goal was simply to unpack the material in extreme detail so you, the listener, can evaluate the claims yourself.
Perfectly stated. Before you go, please make sure to like and subscribe to the show so we can keep bringing you these deep dives.
If you want to explore the full text, the statistics, and yes, the recipes we just discussed, check out Amazon, Kindle, and Google Playbooks to purchase the ebook.
And remember to follow the author at Conrad Riker on Substack to keep up with his ongoing essays.
We want to leave you with a final lingering thought to ponder as you go about your day. Think about this. If human society truly operates like a massive historical pendulum, and Riker argues that it has swung dangerously, unnaturally far toward a gynocentric model that marginalizes men and destabilizes the culture.
Wow, that's next.
That's right. If the intense, unapologetic masculine pushback that he advocates for actually takes hold globally, will it trigger an equal and opposite societal reaction?
Will our institutions eventually find a harmonious synthesis of these biological realities? Or is human civilization destined for a perpetual, exhausting cultural tug-of-war between the sexes?
It is a profound question, and one that history suggests we will be forced to answer sooner rather than later.
Something heavy to mull over until next time.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive.